Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
A-T-Bit Pod Smash.
Where gaming goes to grab a beer.
Do you have one? Okay, there you go.
We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right. And tonight we are talking about console exclusivity, talking about this idea, or platform exclusivity, as I put in our notes, talking about this idea that games are exclusive to certain consoles, aren't available on other consoles, and yeah, we're talking about whether or not that is good for video gaming, good for the industry, good for the culture, and so it's a big debate. It's an ongoing thing. It's been going on for the last 10 years at least, probably, or earlier than that, so we're going to talk about it. We're going to kind of present both sides and kind of come to a conclusion for ourselves. So
it's a huge conversation.
It is,
with
and we're going to try to squeeze it into
lots of avenues.
35 minutes, 45 minutes. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's. We are where gaming goes to grab a beer, though. So we'll get to all that stuff about exclusivity, but we want to talk first about the beers we're drinking. Yeah.
I am drinking, and I won't spoil my favorite thing, but I will just say that this is a beer from Red Dragon, and it's called Let There Be Dragons. It is their sour that they're known for, and they have, when you walk in, a little menu of build your own sour, and they have 3 flavors to choose from: pomegranate, strawberry, and dragon fruit. And I chose pomegranate because it sounded different.
Yeah.
And so I brought home a crowler of that, and I am drinking a pint out of that crowler. The other half goes to my wife, and it is incredibly fruity, not so much sour, but it does taste like pomegranate juice was added to a sour.
Okay.
I don't know if that's what it was, because it's pretty thick. And it looks like it's a little bit thicker than just a juice, but that's what it tastes like. So there you go.
Cool.
Pomegranate juice inside of a sour.
I'm sorry, you said Red Dragon?
Amazing. Red Dragon Brewery in Fredericksburg. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Pomegranate. Yeah, that does sound like a better combination than, like, it sounds like a great combination to me. Like a pomegranate sour sounds yummy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you're just saying
good.
it's meh?
It's delicious in its taste. I just wish it were thicker.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
That's
okay.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
I decided to go. I had to go to Food Lion, and this week they had some Hardywood seasonal beers, and it was the Rum Barrel Pumpkin. So I don't know if you've had this.
Yes, it's delicious.
It's a farmhouse pumpkin ale aged in rum barrels, and like 12%. So I grabbed a 4-pack of that. So I'll read the thing, and then I'll talk about it. It says, Hardywood Rum Barrel Pumpkin combines the nostalgic flavors and aromas of autumn with a blackstrap molasses-laced finish that can only be achieved through months of maturation in Caribbean dark rum barrels. Oh. Pleasantly mellow up front, Hardywood Rum Barrel Pumpkin offers a crescendo of pumpkin pie spices that are emboldened by the barrel aging process and finishes with subtle tea-sweet lingering notes of brown sugar. This beer is awesome, guys. I mean, I'd already had some from the weekend. Yeah, it's good. It's sweet. It's a little bit sweet, which I like, but, I definitely get a lot of the rum, very boozy. And they said pumpkin pie. That's exactly what it tastes like. But I actually poured it for the first time into a glass, and it looks like apple cider. Like, not hard cider. Like, hard cider tends to look more like apple juice to me. No, this looks like straight up, like, like fresh squeezed from the, apple orchard. Like, that's what this looks like to me. It's like really dark brown orange. It's so good. So, yeah.
Yes, that is a very good beer. I've had it before. It's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything you wanted to chat about on the front of the episode here?
Do I want to chat about... Well, I do briefly. I finished Halo 5's story.
Okay.
Finally. I started it in 2017. It's been, 4 or 5 years. It's forever ago. And, the stuff for Halo Infinite's coming out. All the hype is building. There was a campaign trailer forever ago, and then today a new campaign feature kind of live stream event thing happened that fleshed out more of the story. Halo 5 was really bad. It was really, really, really bad as far as its story is concerned.
Right.
Solid gameplay. It's Halo. They've done well with the mechanics. It feels amazing, just like you would expect from a Halo game. But really, Halo 5 almost didn't need to happen. Or you could cut all of you have to play 2 different characters. Like, you play a different Spartan. His name is, I guess Osiris is his name, or it's the name of the team. I couldn't tell.
It's that bad? It's that unclear?
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, and yes, I was jumping back into it, midway through, but I looked up a story synopsis, and I really didn't miss anything. Even starting at, 2/3 of the way through the game. Mm-hmm. Starting there with no memory of what happened prior to. Did you watch any of this stuff today?
No, I don't even know what you're talking about. There was a...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they finally really showed what the Halo Infinite campaign is. And if you know what Far Cry is like, a big open area with waypoints, facilities and structures, and you'll go to a facility or structure and you will clear all of the enemies from it and kind of claim it as your own. That's kind of what this is going to be.
Interesting.
There's different bases and facilities that you'll just go attack, and I guess you have your customized way of approaching the attack if you want to sabotage it or if you want to approach it head on. You can do all that. There are now skill trees. You can level up Master Chief's different abilities, just like a Far Cry game.
Yeah.
And I was I had mixed feelings about all this. I don't really know how I feel like. The story looks like it's going to be good. The gameplay looks great, but all this open world RPG stuff kind of being shoved into Halo, and I guess you haven't seen it, so I don't really know.
No, I mean, you're describing it, and it sounds like a very stark departure. I'm used to Halo being a very on the rails experience, right?
Yeah, and this is not.
And that's not. And that could be a great departure. It could also be shoehorned, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I would rather them take just if they wanted to do something different, if they wanted to, kick away some of the borders and do some, add some open world elements to it. I almost wish that they wouldn't have copied Far Cry, right? Do it, come up with some creative idea on your own for Halo, right? There's other games that can, other games being clones of good games. I've mentioned before, I don't really have a problem with that. It's more, it's kind of more of the games you love, but made from different people with different stories, right? In my mind, there's not really that much wrong. As long as it's done well, it's not really that much wrong borrowing ideas from other games. Yeah. But when you're a franchise like Halo, you kind of either want to stick to what works, what works, which is what they had before, or if you're gonna break the mold, then do it in a way that's unique and interesting and fits Halo. I don't know if taking facilities is really what Halo is all about. It was more Master Chief on kind of a suicide mission, saving the universe because he's Master Chief and he can. He's not the guy to go. He's not the one you send to kind of methodically, recapture things. He's the guy you send when crap hits the fan and you need a hero, right? And so that fits really well in sort of this Uncharted experience where it's very cinematic and on the rails. It doesn't. I don't know. We'll see. It could work great, and maybe I'm crazy, but yeah, I'm not.
We will see. I'm gonna put on my Wind Waker skepticism because, when Wind Waker was first showed off, I was like, "Oh, this isn't Zelda. This is nuts." Yeah. I mean, I was excited about it because I thought it was gorgeous and it fit it well, but at the same time, I had this apprehension. So I'm gonna do it again. I'm like, you know what? This could be good. This could be awesome, and I will. I'm going into it with open mind. Yep, that was it. That was the thing I was going to chat about. I was wondering if you had seen the thing.
No, I hadn't. Yep, sorry.
But I tried to explain it to you, so now you've been informed, and it's fine.
Cool.
That's...
Cool. Well, Halo, maybe, are our favorite things, but...
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite thing.
Yeah.
A segment of our show where we talk and share something that we're digging from the past week.
Exactly. Yep. Something we're excited about or intrigued by, interested in. It may not be an objectively good thing, but it's something that made our weeks more worth talking about on a podcast. So, yeah, what's your favorite thing?
I am, as you know, in the thick of transitioning everything in my life, and that includes work. And so I am migrating off of a project that would not allow me to work from home onto a different project that does. And as such, I am changing the team with which I work around. So as a way to say goodbye to the current team that I am with, we planned a happy hour. What I called my, the project I'm working on is called TACSIM. It's TACSIM. It's short for tactical simulator. So TACSIM.
Right.
I am now going to be TACSIM dead because I'm leaving that project, but I'm still staying with the company. So I'm not quitting. I'm still working for the same company, but just a different project. So I'm now I'm not yet, but I'm going to be TACSIM dead. So this was my TACSIM celebration of life happy hour. And I actually just came from there, which is why I was at Red Dragon, because all of the team members and myself all went to Red Dragon for drinks to hang out and kind of a send-off, last hurrah sort of deal for me as I move on to other things where I will become a TACSIM ghost and I will haunt the TACSIM team and I will be TACSIM dead. All of that is very Halloween.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's very
festive,
fitting. Yeah, apparently you guys came up with all these terms around Halloween. It must have been, right? Because
well, it actually came up over the summer when the first team member left for a different project because he didn't like TaxSim too much, so he just left to pursue better and greater things. The project TaxSim was not fulfilling for him, so I stood by that decision and was like, yes, you go do that. That sounds awesome. So he looked elsewhere in the company and found something different. So he was the first one to TaxSim die, and we coined that phrase back then. And that was July or maybe June for him. So we just continued
Not
that
as
rhetoric through
fitting,
my
but that's
departure, and now I'm TaxSim dead.
Got it.
But, so anyway, the favorite thing was the drinks, hanging out at Red Dragon with coworkers, and having a couple drinks and just joking around about everything. It was a lot of fun.
So if you're in the Fredericksburg area or ever visiting the Fredericksburg area, you should check out one of Termite's favorite things, which is Red Dragon. For sure.
The Red Dragon Brewery.
Yeah,
yes.
It's good stuff. Cool.
Yep. Although I had a couple of beers tonight that just didn't hit very well. They weren't that great. The ESB, which I usually love, was very watered down and overly malty. It wasn't balanced at all, and that was kind of a bummer. And then I got a IPA that it didn't taste right, and I don't know what happened over there because they have had a perfect track record, but this time I don't know.
Disappointing. Well, you're leaving, so it's not your problem anymore.
I'm going to Virginia brewery mecca, so it'll be
true.
fun.
It's true. You are going to be living in the mecca. Cool. Well, my favorite thing, I have a couple. I'll get out of the way real quick. We finished Squid Game, so I don't know, 3 or 4 episodes ago, you recommended it to me, and I didn't understand what you were talking about. And I listened after we had started. I listened to that episode as I was editing it, and I was like, oh, okay, this explanation makes more sense than I gave him credit for at the time. I was just really confused at the time. Great though, it was awesome. I don't know if you finished it or not, but
we've been done with it. Yeah,
yeah, it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was definitely one of those things where it's like, oh, I really want to watch another episode, but we gotta go to bed.
Yep, but they left all of the episodes in perfect pacing to make you want to watch the next.
Yeah, they were very, it was very well done. So you should check out Squid Game if you haven't. The other thing that is my favorite thing, a buddy of mine, coworker of mine, gifted me a audio book because he had 15 credits just that he was sitting on, and Audible has recently, I would say within the last year or so, enabled a feature where you can actually use the credits to gift someone a book. So if you don't want to use your credits on yourself, you can burn them on a friend, and it's kind of a relatively new feature that you would think would have been day one feature, so I don't know why Audible took so long to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he gifted me a book because he asked me if I had ever read it, and I said no. And he said, okay, well, you have to. So it's called Past Watch, and it's by the same guy who did Ender's Game, the Ender's series. His name is Orson Scott Card, if you're unfamiliar with him. But it's this really cool book that has a really interesting premise. The very, very short premise setup that I'll give you is that, basically it's far in the future where humanity has kind of eliminated all need, but it's come at the cost of 90% of the population, so all that's left is 10% of the population. But within that 10%, they've sort of eliminated all needs.
It's kind of like utopia.
Kind of a utopia, yeah. And they've developed, and they've started to try to heal the planet, right? They've used their technology and technological advantage to start to heal the planet. So in addition to that, they've developed technology sophisticated enough to see into the past, and so they become perfectly like you would watch a movie. So they've, this organization sprung up called Past Watch, and they basically try to learn from the past, either cultures or just, following people, and just kind of try to write reports about, either about those cultures or about these are things we can learn from these cultures. Anyways, long story short, they get super interested in the life of Christopher Columbus and start, studying him sort of as an organization. And there's a project within to study them. And one person decides to dedicate she makes it her goal. She's I'm going to find the moment that he decided that he was going to go west across the Atlantic, because up to that point in his life, he wanted to go east and start a crusade. He wanted to go to, liberate Constantinople and Jerusalem from the Muslims. Mm-hmm. That's actually historical. And the moment that he changed his mind, according to his historical logs, is he got shipwrecked one time while sailing with the Portuguese. And on the island that he washed up on, he says he had a vision of God. God told him to go west across the Atlantic and find gold and convert the peoples there in quote, India to Christianity. So she goes back to that moment because she's I really narrowed down this moment and I want to see what happens. and she sees God appear and tell him to go across the Atlantic in his language. And they look closer and they analyze and they discover basically that it's a hologram. And that's the moment they learn that not only is seeing into the past possible, but changing the past is possible. And not only is it possible, it's been done before because someone basically created our history by sending this hologram into the past and having Columbus go west. And so so basically they call them the interveners. The interveners created or abolished their entire existence in order to, because it's a causal loop, right? It's time travel. It's not like a separate universe. Like they obliterated themselves because their history was apparently so horrible that they wanted to fix it. And this is the way they decided to do it. And
feasible. Okay.
Yeah. And so basically I won't spoil anything else about the plot. If you guys if you're intrigued, you want to check it out. It's really interesting, but that's kind of the setup. And it's from 1996 and Orson Scott Card is kind of a notorious conservative. He's not actually, the book is fairly balanced in its approach to, kind of politics, but it was 1996, right? So it uses a little bit of dated and possibly offensive terms. Like, so he does call them Indies or Indians as opposed to, Native Americans, as you would sort of expect a civilized futuristic culture to adhere to. So yeah, there's some things like that are a little bit dated, but overall it's really good and pretty humanistic in its approach to this plot. So really good.
Cool.
Worth checking out.
What's it called again?
Past Watch.
Past Watch.
Yeah. Its subtitle is Past Watch: The Redemption of Christopher Columbus. So pretty good. So yeah, definitely it was fun because I think I started listening to it around Columbus Day and I'm like, wow, this is fitting. So,
right?
Yeah.
It's Indigenous Peoples Day. It's not Columbus Day anymore. Unfortunate that it's an audiobook and not a TV show.
It's a book too, but anyways, yeah, that's that. That's favorite things, which leads us to our last segment, which is DLC. DLC stands for downloadable content, is a segment of our show where we have a gimmicky, fun, gamey kind of discussion where we talk about something about video games that you wouldn't normally talk about. Sometimes it's related to our main topic, sometimes it's not. Tonight's is inspired by our main topic, talking about the idea of exclusivity. And we're going to kind of poke holes and poke fun at it to start with and kind of like ease us into that conversation. And so I wanted to basically prompt us by discussing what is a non-tech, non-entertainment. So you can't do TV or even books. No entertainment, no tech. What is another kind of industry that, like, what would it look like for another industry to do exclusivity deals or do exclusivity the way that the video game industry does exclusivity? So if you need a second to think about it, I got a pretty solid answer. Sweet, awesome. Let me hear it.
It has to be real or fake?
It has to be something real that people know and understand. I suppose you could like make the company itself, like if you make up a company for a product, but it's got to be like a product or service or something that people like recognize in modern society.
Right. I mean, like, does it have to be real company?
No. You can make up a company. Examples. Yeah, sure. You can make up a company. Yeah.
I'm going to say I will not make up a company. I will use Tesla.
Okay.
And I will say the exclusivity is the 100% electronic vehicle.
Oh, interesting.
Which means no other car manufacturer can make electronic vehicles.
If they had like somehow patented. I don't know how that would work legally.
Right.
Like, because they could patent a specific like technology in modern society. They could patent a technology, and therefore have exclusivity.
A specific supplier of batteries.
Maybe, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so, like, car batteries, whatever it takes to power an electric vehicle, is the only person they're allowed to sell to is Tesla.
Yeah.
And so, like antitrust laws be darned in this hypothetical, but that's the exclusivity deal that was struck between battery makers and Tesla. And the government got involved and said, hey, we will subsidize the cost of these batteries to Tesla if Tesla agrees to buy from Termite Battery Core. And Termite Battery Core is going to sell all of their batteries only to Tesla.
Interesting.
And so if
couldn't
you,
another
as a consumer,
battery maker, competitive battery maker, just make a different adequate battery and sell it?
They could, but like you said, patent laws would make it impossible for any other car, the drivetrain for electronic vehicles that use these batteries and turn it into torque to drive. is patented, and there's no other way around it because it's vague enough that they've clamped down on it.
Mm-hmm.
So they just grab. That's it. Like, if you want electronic vehicles, you have to buy Tesla.
Mm-hmm. I see it as I like, if we were to compare it directly to video games, because you don't see a situation where it's like, in the video game industry, you don't see a situation where it's like, well, only Sony can make consoles, is what I would almost compare what you're describing to, where it's true. Like, only Sony can make consoles. However, I can see a circumstance where, like, if you were to compare it to, I could see it where the only electronic vehicles that can have this model of, like, the best, like, if they made a deal with, I don't know, who makes, like, car radios, like Philips, or even Sony, right? Like, only, like, from now on, only Sony, like, the only car you can get Sony car radios is in a Tesla. I can see that. Or even, like, you know, T-Mobile or whatever makes, like, that kind of sort of, like, in-car Wi-Fi, but it's only available in Teslas or whatever. I'm like, I can see that being, like, a more, you know, apt comparison to what we see in the video game industry, at least. I was thinking, like, houses. Like, imagine if there was a company out there, I'll just use you. Like, on top of Termite batteries, there's also Termite Housing Core. And Termite Housing Core makes, like, houses, right? Like that's the, quote, platform. They build houses all across the country, and they're known, they advertise their houses. And they make a exclusivity deal with, like, I don't know, Amazon, and you can have an Amazon, like, they take Amazon Home and, like, blow it up, right? And say, like, blow up that idea with exclusivity where it's like, your Amazon Home is a Termite home, but it's only available in, like, Termite Home, and it's built in everything, but you can't like, you can't get it anywhere else. You have to buy this house in order to get the Alexa Termite. Or whatever, or the Amazon, what do you call it, Echo? The Echo, yeah, the Amazon Echo. It's like, yeah, that's, like, that was my go-to example, is, like, imagine, like, having to buy a house and, you know, I want this cool thing in my house, electronic or whatever. And, you know, they also have deals with, like, Whirlpool, you know, the manufacturer for, laundry machines and
every appliance.
Yeah, everything in there. Everything in there is exclusive
ranges,
to those houses. You can't get them anywhere else. You have to buy this house. That's kind of like how it works in the video game industry. And, like,
it is kind
of ridiculous, right? So
it's crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, it's I don't think that it could work in anything other than entertainment. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why I said non-entertainment, non-tech, is to kind of demonstrate how, like, this doesn't work in other
Basically,
kinds of
what
industry.
You're saying is it doesn't really work in physical things
products
that you can touch and use.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, but you see, but that's why, you know, part of the reason why I wanted to stretch our imaginations is because there's exclusivity deals in other forms of entertainment, right? Like, Netflix has exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. Netflix is the platform. You have to buy your Netflix subscription. You can either pirate it or you can pay your Netflix subscription. So that's, you know, and Microsoft, you know, non-entertainment but tech platforms too have a lot of exclusivity, right? Like, there are certain Microsoft applications that you can only run on a Microsoft box. You can't install it on an Apple or Linux or whatever.
Same with phones.
Yep, exactly. So there's like tech. That's why I said, you know, because it's easy to come up with tech and, like, real life examples of what's happening right now for both tech and entertainment, but not so much outside of those other industries. And listeners, hey, if you can think of real life examples or fun made up examples, we want to hear more of those. We want you to kind of carry on the DLC conversation outside of the podcast and talk to us about things that you think would be ridiculous to have the same kind of exclusivity, or if there's something out there beyond tech and entertainment that I'm just not thinking of right now that is an exclusivity kind of situation. I want to hear about it. We want to hear about it. So, Termite, where can the listeners share their ideas if they have them?
You can tell us all about your exclusivity ideas over on our Discord channel, which you can find a link to in all of our show notes. You can find our show notes at 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website with links to all of our podcasting platforms across your various devices, wherever you would like to listen to us. But we also have our other social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, and that's all of them. So I was going to say Discord again, but I started with Discord this time. Nice. So there you go. We are on all of those. You can start a topic on Reddit. You can add us on Twitter. You can comment on something we post on Facebook. Wherever you are, we like to be as well. We have an Instagram. You can find all of those at 80bitpodsmash.com.
Sweet. All right. So, again, talking about console or platform exclusivity in general, I say that only because there are exclusivity arrangements for platforms that are not hardware platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll break down what that looks like, but we'll use the overarching term of platform exclusivity, but we are mostly probably going to be focusing on the actual hardware consoles themselves or PCs. And so, yeah, we'll, at kind of high level, we've already kind of hinted at it, talked about it in our DLC, but exclusivity is when you can only get, you have to own or have installed the platform, somehow invested in the platform in order to have access to the content. So it doesn't always mean you have to buy something physical. Epic Game Store is an example of where it's a free to download it, but you have to invest in some way, right? You have to invest hard drive space, you have to invest attention, and then you have to buy games from their platform for the games that are exclusive to it. But you'd have to buy the games anyways, right? It's just but the access to that content is restricted to a specific platform that you have to have invested time, money, attention, or in some cases just hard drive space in order to access. So, makes sense?
And we are talking about video games.
Yes, sorry.
Specifically,
well,
video
platform
games.
exclusivity is something beyond video games, like I said.
But for this conversation,
we are going to focus mostly on how it affects the gaming industry. And, it's really most talked about in the gaming industry because there's more money at stake for one in video games, and there's sort of the kind of people who play video games have, I think, more of an emotional investment. Like, people will be upset if their favorite movie is not available to the platform, favorite movie or TV show is not available to the platform, but I don't know. I feel like they get over it faster than games. Maybe.
Well, it's like the barrier of entry to switch a platform on a streaming service,
true.
like between Netflix and Hulu, is very low and doesn't really. It does cost the monthly subscription service, but if a new movie comes out on like Apple TV, it's easy to get into Apple TV and go stream that thing.
Right.
Versus like in a video game that costs $60 is released exclusively on a $500 console.
That's it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Then you're kind of priced out of ever playing that unless you go through other means.
Right, yeah, definitely. The investment ratio is a lot higher for video games on the whole. Yep, cool. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. What is kind of sort of the opposite of exclusivity, right? What are the kind of terms we use? Because this is part of this is just defining terms, setting up the guidelines of the conversation. And so what would, when we use the other terms that indicate non-exclusivity, what are we talking about? I would say third party is one. Third party games tend to be, not always, but tend to be multi-platform. There's another one right there, multi-platform, cross-platform. Those are some of the terms that we're talking about.
But you just introduced a whole entire new phrase to folks that might have no clue what you're talking about with third party. So really quickly, a little side note, we're going to go on a little sidecar conversation with Termite. There's first party, there's second party, and there's third party.
Yes.
And what these are development studios that make video games. First party development studios are wholly owned and operated by the console maker.
Yep.
So Sony
platform maker.
has correct.
Yep.
Yes, platform maker.
Mm-hmm.
Sony has studios such as Naughty Dog that produced Last of Us Part 2 exclusively on PlayStation.
Yep.
Microsoft has exclusively owned, so to speak, a relationship with 343 Industries, which is a game studio that makes Halo.
Mm-hmm.
And Nintendo has a million different development studios that have all kind of different names that exclusively make Mario and Zelda, etc. Those are all first-party titles. Those are first-party games. Those are exclusive to each of their three platform holders.
Right, and extends to non-console platforms as well. Steam has Team Fortress, and Valve, I should say, has Team Fortress. They have...
Yeah, but those came to consoles, too.
Half-Life. Oh, that's true.
The orange box came out on consoles.
Yes.
I don't know of any PC exclusives now. There used to be
Blizzard?
some. I don't know.
Blizzard stuff, yeah. Blizzard, for a while,
no,
at least.
Overwatch is on everything.
World of Warcraft is still...
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. There it is, the true.
Yeah, something.
World of Warcraft, it's only available on PC, and it's only available through the Blizzard launcher. You can't, download it through Steam. You can't download it from the Epic Game Store, so it's exclusive to Blizzard's platform, and it's exclusive to PC, the hardware, to run it. So, there you go, the true example.
Second party, there you go. We're still on my little cart ride off to the side here. So second party developers are not wholly owned by the console maker. Often console makers have a majority or a plurality of that, typically anywhere from 40 to 60% of the ownership. So it's much more difficult to define a second party game. I think of Sony making their moves for Horizon Zero Dawn, Death Stranding, Days Gone, and now God of War are all going to PC. So that means Santa Monica Studios, Guerrilla Games, and Kojima Productions, and I know I left another studio out, are all almost second party because they're still publishing onto a PC platform, but Sony still owns most of what they're doing.
Would it be like, I think of like, I guess in my mind when I think second party, I would think like Insomniac pre-Sony's purchase of them, right? Where they have a really close relationship and their games are still exclusive, but they're not owned whole cloth by Sony. Yeah. Would that be another example of second party?
And Rareware for Nintendo and Microsoft was another example of one. Game Freak for Pokemon games, because Game Freak publishes on other platforms too.
Sure.
But they're not wholly owned by Nintendo, which is why Pokemon is always like separate from their directs and such. It's always kind of confusing because people confuse like Pokemon Go with Nintendo Switch, and it's not. It's actually two entirely different things.
Right.
But so it is much harder to really define what second party is. You're right.
Yeah.
But Insomniac prior to Sony acquiring them is a great example actually. And then you have third party, which is what we talked about with the opposite of exclusivity, where people like Square Enix with Outriders or Far Cry 6 by Ubisoft. Pretty much all of like Ubisoft,
Activision, EA
are all third party.
2K, yep,
2K, Gearbox. They make games for all the platforms. So they don't have, they're, as a development studio, like Gearbox made Godfall exclusively for PS5 and PC, but
that was a deal. They cut a deal with November. They cut a deal with Sony to release that in November last year. I think that's where I was coming from. Yeah. But yeah, no, there's nothing other than money that determines where they go, what platform they publish on. Yeah, it's not that they don't ever show up as exclusives, but it's that they are untethered and therefore, can kind of go wherever they want. And usually, usually have limited contracts, limited exclusivity. A great example of this is the company that does this all the time these days is Square Enix. They are constantly making limited exclusivity deals.
Timed exclusives, they call it.
Right, exactly. And that's with, so that's another term we may be talking about is timed exclusivity or timed exclusives. And that even to this day, though Final Fantasy VII Remake is still exclusive to PlayStation, it's still listed as a timed exclusive with a current indefinite exclusivity date. They have not announced that it's coming to Xbox, but the implication, and PC, but the implication is that it will eventually be coming to Xbox and PC whenever Square Enix and Sony, are done making money with one another. And
whenever that contract ends, whatever the agreement is.
Yep. And the same is true for Final Fantasy 16 and all that other stuff, and pretty much all the games, not all, but many of the games that Square Enix is coming out with. Forspoken, I think, is the other one that's time exclusive. So yeah, that also happens.
So in summary, third-party titles are usually the opposite of exclusivity, but we also use terms such as cross-play, cross-progression, and cross-save to indicate
or just multi-platform, I think, is another.
And multi-platform,
that's another one, yeah.
And different terms.
And the cross-play, cross-platform, they all have very specific
we'll get into
differences. We had a whole episode on it, actually, so we don't really need to dive into them. The general idea is...
Go check that out.
Yeah, go check out, or look it up. Sure, we maybe we'll be able to find the actual number. But we did a whole episode on it where we broke down the differences between the different like cross-platform terminologies. The general though is like basically it's one way or another of playing the same game on multiple consoles without necessarily having to purchase it multiple times. Sometimes yes, and when you're talking about like cross saves, you probably have to purchase the game separately, but you don't have to like have your progression locked to one platform. But nevertheless, the idea is that it's like being able to play the same game across multiple platforms and having something carry over between the platforms as opposed to it being isolated. So
our cross-platform episode was episode 93.
There you go. Wow.
In July of 2019.
Wow. So roll back then.
Over
pre-pandemic. Oh, yes. Fun.
In the before times.
So, yep. So cool. All right, cool. All right, so have we sort of done a decent job, you think, of explaining?
Yes, we've nailed down what exclusivity is.
Our final
silos.
Yep, I was gonna say our final question within this grouping of questions is: what are the major platforms that exclusivity exists on? We have probably already said all of them, but let's run through them real quick just for clarity's sake.
Sony PlayStation, Microsoft Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC, which has Epic Game Store, Steam, Battle.net, Origin. And throw in any Stadia is also its own platform, but it's primarily on PC. But you can play on phones and
most of
Chromebooks,
Stadia's stuff. I don't think
streaming.
Stadia has any exclusives to my knowledge, or if they do,
all of the exclusive development studios, the first party ones we addressed earlier, were all shut down.
Yeah, I would say there's probably more exclusivity on mobile devices than there is on
Android and Apple.
Apple, and those are exclusive more probably due to hardware limitations than actual deals, like, right, games.
Oh, there's definitely like source development kits that require licensing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I know there are definitely games that you can get on the Apple Store that you can't get on Android and vice versa. So that's also part of it as well. So yeah, we're not gonna talk so much about mobile though, so you'll probably hear us mostly talking about Steam, Epic Game Store, Xbox, Sony, and Microsoft. So no, Xbox, Microsoft. Shoot.
Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and PC.
You got it.
That's it. There's 4. And PC has a couple in there that are under the hood that don't really matter.
Sure, yeah, exactly. So, cool. All right, so the meat of our episode, pros and cons. Let's try to break these down as, like, we'll get to what we think our final verdict is, our opinion on this thing, but let's try to be as objective as possible in discussing the pros of platform exclusivity and the cons of platform exclusivity. And we'll also talk a whole separate question about like who benefits from each one, but we can kind of touch on it as well. Like what, obviously developers and publishers and consumers all have different priorities. And so those will probably come into play as we talk about pros and cons. So
place your bets as to who this benefits.
Oh, yeah. Cool. So what are the pros of platform exclusivity? Why could this thing be beneficial in general?
This would not be a podcast with Termite if I did not address the video game industry in its entirety throughout history.
Yeah.
So I will start off with looking at console exclusivity to address pros and cons. I'm getting there, but just bear with me for a minute. Back in the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis days, they had such different hardware specs that they required entirely different development studios to make a single game separately for each platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm failing to recall out of memory specific examples, but I know that like Lion King and Aladdin, both Disney games, were developed by entirely different studios for the specific platforms.
Wow.
I'm sure there was commonality shared between the two that were then passed down into each individual company, but what I'm getting at is it looked wildly different.
Mm-hmm.
And so a pro in that regard is you may have chosen the better console to get a better studio to better utilize the hardware. Now today, given that the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series consoles, and the PC all use the same architecture as they have since 2013 with the advent of PS4 and Xbox One, we're now seeing ports and games primarily being developed for consoles first and then ported to PC, given the extra bells and whistles that PCs allow. And so with all of that, when that's actually a pro of console exclusivity, is that you can get a game built specifically for the thing that a console can do.
Exactly. I mean, you see this with a lot of games coming out on the place. This is a great generation to talk about exclusivity because there are games being designed for the PlayStation 5. I'll just compare 2 games that came out around launch, right? Like Godfall and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And we could sit here and deliberate as to which game was better, and it would probably be Assassin's Creed Valhalla in most people's eyes. That said, Assassin's Creed Valhalla on the PlayStation 5, in regards to haptic feedback, vibrations on the controller, felt the exact same as if it were playing on an Xbox because it was third party. They couldn't design unique inputs or unique outputs, I should say, for the haptics on that game. Godfall, on the other hand, one of the few areas the game was praised for was how it utilized the DualSense controller's haptic, capabilities, and so in that regard, you had a exclusive game that was designed to run with a specific controller, a specific piece of hardware that was a unique experience that you couldn't get on the other console because the literal hardware was different. And that's just one example. It doesn't have to be obviously haptics and controller design either. It could be the way it utilizes the hard drive, like you said, or like we saw with Rift Apart. That game couldn't run on an Xbox because it doesn't have the same hard drive or SSD capabilities.
Like Mark Cerny had his presentation about the internals of the PlayStation 5, and he went in depth about the actual circuitry behind the solid state drive that is proprietary and is impossible for any other company to ever reproduce it because it is patented. It is very specific technology for the PlayStation 5. It's not different enough to prohibit third-party titles from porting games easily to it. It does behave like a PC solid-state drive does, but it does allow for very specific developers to do very specific things on that platform. And Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart leverages that, along with the DualSense.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we see the same thing, even back in history with Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Like, each console had their thing that they did better than the other, whether it was sound or specific visuals or color palette or animations or frame rates. They all, and it was a lot less tied to like horsepower of its computing ability. Sure. It was more like, what did the circuitry allow things to do? What could you do with cartridges, etc.? And so the same thing then is still kind of in play now. And when a console manufacturer, Sony or Microsoft, goes to R&D, research and develop a new console, they have to come up with a way that both satisfies the third party and make it appealing that consumers would want to purchase their box to play everything.
Right.
And so that's another pro of console exclusivity, is that you get really, really good titles specifically for that platform, because they want you to buy that box.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the other, I mean, real quick, one comment I'll make is that you talked about how PC ports sometimes of console games are sometimes crappy. Well, it works in the other direction too, because you've got PC games that can never possibly run on a console, only because the input problem, right? Because on a keyboard, you have so many more inputs than you do on a controller. And when a game is designed to use a mouse and keyboard, it's sometimes literally virtually impossible to port it to a console. And that's just one of the many problems. Games that are designed for PC are often should be played on PC. And yeah, so it works in both directions there. And the other thing I'll say is, you sort of hit on the kind of other major pro of platform exclusivity is competition drives innovation. Like, no matter what way you cut it, the reason why we have, laws against anti-competitive behavior, the reason why we have monopoly laws and trust busting, laws in the first place is because at some point in capitalism's history, we realized that when a company monopolized the, production, basically monopolized ideas or technology or whatever, it stagnated innovation and prevented, it allowed them to do not only super corrupt things, but it also made it so that nobody could come in and do it better and make overall life better. So, you can say what you want about capitalism, but one of the things it does well is it hopefully does well, I should say. In an ideal capitalistic society, it enables space for competition, which almost always makes the products themselves better. And we see this play out in gaming, no bones about it. Like, almost always the best games are the games that are exclusive, right? Like Sony's exclusive games are top quality. And Sony's, if you look at the best PlayStation game list of all time, you're going to find very few third-party games on there, right? Because, the best game, the reason to buy because that's what they use to get you to buy the console, right? They get you to buy the hardware because they want you to play. They basically say you can't play these games anywhere else other than PlayStation. Xbox is the same thing. PC's a little different, right? Because there's it's more of a free world, I guess, on PC in regards to the actual hardware itself. But the makers themselves are like, they'll find ways to say, hey, this game runs best if you have this kind of graphics card and this kind of sound equipment, and they'll use that to drive sales of hardware as well. That's again, it's a little slightly different. So you see it more in the console space of being like, if you don't buy this hardware, you can't play this game. But again, we'll get to the cons of that.
It's a trend.
Yeah.
It's not like guaranteed. There was a lot of third-party titles that have won Game of the Year awards. True. Yeah. Sekiro, Overwatch, The Witcher 3, Dragon Age Inquisition were all third-party games, at least published on different platforms. Sure. But Breath of the Wild, God of War, Last of Us Part 2 are console exclusives for those consoles.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I wasn't trying to indicate that it was a hard and fast thing where it's like they're always better, because that's not true. Because, again, console or competition works towards the third party. Like, it works with the third-party stuff, too, because the third-party developers still want to sell their games. Right? And they have the sort of, quote, freedom to sell them on whatever platform they want, but they still need to compete with the quality that's being put out by the first party title. So again, That's my point, is because the competition, I wonder if there was truly a sort of open platform trend in the gaming industry. Let's just say that it just, console exclusives never really took off, never really worked in the way that, they had in our quote timeline. And let's envision and pretend a world where the last 2 decades have been basically like everything was available on whatever platform you wanted. I can't imagine but think that the quality would probably have gone down, like the overall average quality of games, because you weren't competing in that space to draw people to your platform, to draw people to your... and they'd have to do it... We'll get to kind of what they would have to do, but they'd have to do it in the form of, like, features, right? Like your online capabilities. So maybe that would kind of make the platforms themselves better, but the games, you know, on those platforms, if they're all just kind of available, like I can't imagine, but think they're not working as hard to try to make it the place to play because it's got the best games, right? I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Who can tell what would have happened?
Yeah, I think it would just look different.
I think it would look
like
different.
If every game was available on every platform everywhere, the best would still boil to the top. It would just be available everywhere.
It would be available everywhere, but I kind of think like you wouldn't get... I don't think you would get like Returnal with the crazy like haptic, you know, the rain, right? The feeling of rain against the like the vibrating in the controller and the cool like tension. It wouldn't... If Returnal had come out for Xbox and PC, it wouldn't have been as cool of an experience because you wouldn't have had that. Like maybe it was
what
only
it would look like is it would be a bundle with its own solid state drive and its own controller in a box with the game, and it could work on every console, but it had to have these
but that
wouldn't
sell.
Be ridiculous.
That would be exactly, that would be ridiculous. So either it would have to be bundled together and cost more and be like stupid in that way, or it would be a less interesting game because it wouldn't have that features. And maybe it would only be 20% less interesting because it didn't have the haptics, but that's still less interesting, right? So the fact that they designed it for a specific set of hardware made the game more interesting. And all, you know, look up the reviews of Returnal, right? All the reviews talk about how amazing it is with the haptic feedback. Like they all talk about how it leveraged that.
Definitely a selling feature for sure.
Exactly. Yep. So, you know, that's kind of the point there. So, any other pros that you can think of? I feel like those two are the two big ones. Is like innovation, making the overall quality of games go up, and then also games being designed to leverage specific hardware are kind of the two.
One other thought that is a pro, but I don't know how to put words to it right now. Okay. It's a little bit more meta than what we've been talking about. Looking at the strategies, it's kind of a piggyback of what you said. The strategies of Sony with the PlayStation 5, the strategy of Microsoft with its Xbox games and PC Game Pass, and the strategy of Nintendo kind of on its own with the Switch and its hardware is completely different. What console exclusivity has kind of allowed is an entirely different strategy where we have Sony favoring the developers, the development studios, making the PlayStation extremely attainable and easy to work with. And then you have Xbox that's very consumer friendly with Game Pass having all of its best games available on a subscription service that has a very low barrier of cost to a consumer. And then you have Nintendo that's kind of operating on its own.
They're kind of like brand focused, right? Like it's almost like they're, you know, whereas Sony's more developer focused, Nintendo is sort of developed on their brand and like this is a Nintendo game. Because even though Nintendo clearly has its own internal development studios, I couldn't name many of them off the top of my head like I could with Sony. Because Sony,
they don't put them out. Like they don't put their names
exactly out. Right. Sony celebrates its developers, how they're operating on independently, but also under the Sony brand, right? But that's like the way that Sony presents it. But then you have Nintendo that's like doesn't talk about it at all. Everything that comes out from Nintendo is Nintendo's, right? Like all of Nintendo's first party stuff is under this sort of overarching umbrella of Nintendo, and that's kind of their strategy, and it's enabled entirely by exclusivity. It has always been.
Right.
Yeah.
With the exception of like retro studios.
Right. So what you're kind of highlighting is, I think what you're highlighting is that it's like exclusivity sort of enables these companies to put their own spin on their approach to how they sell games. Whereas if everything was just kind of available on everything, then, I mean, Nintendo would have dropped out. If that were the case, we wouldn't have the Switch, right? Because Nintendo would have dropped out of hardware a long time ago. If they were sort of, quote, forced to put all their games, whether it was through laws or even just social pressure, if they were forced to publish all their stuff on everything, they would have become like Sega and just made software.
And that is a great segue into the cons of console exclusivity. We have two consoles that are perfect examples of why console exclusivity is hard and very difficult. And that is the Sega Dreamcast and the Nintendo Wii U.
Yeah.
For whatever reasons that we won't get into because we don't have time, both the Sega Dreamcast and the Wii U have failed. They did not keep up with the demand. They were too expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The developers found it difficult or hard to put games on it, and it was just not appealing to anyone, and it failed on all accounts. Not appealing to the consumers, not appealing to the developers. They were trying to do too much or not enough. One of the two. There's a whole bunch of things that happened. But if you think about a console that's problematic, that's not getting the exclusive attention to it, it will fail really, really quickly. And that is a con of platform exclusivity, because the Wii U, with its gamepad, prior to the Switch's existence, was actually pretty cool. And it could have done a lot of things if it was leveraged differently, but it failed. It wasn't marketed correctly.
Right,
and
the Switch is sort of the
Dreamcast.
culmination of what they were trying to accomplish with the Wii U. But
Exactly.
well, yeah, that hardware argument I do think cuts both ways, right? Because on the one hand, you've got games like, great, cool, unique games that can only be played on that console because they're designed for that console. But if that console is too complicated and ridiculous, you lose third-party support. And that third-party support, as you just demonstrated with the Wii U, is still so important, because it doesn't matter how many great exclusives you have. If you lose access to those third-party games, I don't know, man. Like, can you imagine if the PS5 didn't have Assassin's Creed Valhalla and didn't have, Lord?
Oh, people go to Xbox.
Right, exactly, right?
They get everything.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Or just, resign to just doing their PCs. You know what I mean? Like, right? Like, a console still has to court third-party developers, and they will always have to. So that can be a con of exclusivity. If you focus too much on that, as Nintendo did, then you will lose third-party support, and that's a problem.
Yeah, the console exclusivity drives, like, you have to be different. That's the point.
Yeah.
Like, you have to draw people to you, and so you're going to, as a company, take risks in the R&D department to figure out what consumers want. And if you don't get that right, then this is what happened with the Dreamcast and the Wii U. They didn't get it right. And the Sega Saturn, really. But that's what console exclusivity kind of does. It drives the big platform makers to make something different. They have to. It's the only way you're going to get any attention from anyone.
Right, which
and
can
that's
be
what drives innovation.
Yep, but it can also be a double-edged sword. It can also be a tightrope balance to have to still.
Exactly.
You still have to make it so that other things can run on it, right? And so Sony competes well on that balance, right? They still make a platform that is competitive. So even though they're like, we want games that can only run on the PlayStation and only will run on the PlayStation, they're also like, but it still also has to run third-party games. So let's not go crazy. Let's not make a controller that's so out of left field that it can't still play Assassin's Creed or whatever, or FIFA or whatever else, I would say the other obvious con, the elephant in the room here is consumers have such a harder barrier of entry when you have exclusives, right? And that's the constant complaint. This is why it's a debate in the first place, is because it sucks that I have, and some of those barriers are going away, but in the past, it sucks that if I wanted to play Halo, sorry, man, you got to buy an Xbox, period, hands down. I, being a middle-class American, really can only afford a console. In the past, I was willing to invest more in a high-end PC, because that's where I was mostly playing stuff on, but I don't really think I can afford I don't anymore, for sure. I couldn't, with a family and responsibilities. I definitely can't afford to just like dump $1,000 or more on a high end console. Or sorry, that's like more like a mid tier console. I definitely couldn't invest in a $3,000 PC to play New World or whatever, Amazon's new MMO, and also buy a $500 PlayStation or X and trying to throw an Xbox on top of that. If I'm very, very lucky, I might be able to do $500 for a PlayStation and then spring for a sale, Black Friday sale on an Xbox Series X. But for sure, I will save up for a stronger, more powerful Nintendo Switch, right? So if I'm very lucky and circumstances and finances align, then maybe I'll be able to get 3 consoles to play on.
Yeah.
More than likely, I'm stuck to the 2 that I have, Switch and PlayStation, probably for the next generation's worth of video games. And
which is interesting that you mention all of that, because pretty much my entire life and all of my friends that have been gamers that I've been talking to always have that one platform that's like their main, and they get that on release day or really close to release day for a bunch of stuff. Of course, third party covers them.
Yep.
They have all access to the third party games, but there's always the ones, like you have people in the Sony camp that are going to get a PS5, and they've done that. I know so many people that have. My friends list is stacked with PS5 owners that don't have Xboxes, but would buy an Xbox Series X or S later at a cheaper price to like kind of supplement,
catch up, right?
To catch up
on
and
what
like
they
get
missed,
access
and
to
then
those things.
get access to the future ones. Yeah, I feel like the most common combinations that I can think of is like, I don't know very many people. I know they exist, but I don't know very many people that have the trifecta of Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation. And I think that very few people have all 4 of also having a high end gaming PC on top of that. So I think the most common configurations are either PlayStation and Switch, PlayStation and PC, Xbox and Switch, Xbox and PC, or PC and Switch, right? Like, I feel like those are the most common configurations, is like you have
I feel like
pick 2 out of 4.
I think it's either Sony or Microsoft and PC. So like everyone's got a computer because computers range in price so much that like even a non-gaming enthusiast can still get a video card and throw it into their Dell and like do something.
I don't know.
Like,
I still feel like there's like a
easy.
there's a barrier of entry though to gaming, period, right? Like I feel like even if you're playing on PC, you still probably need to invest at least at this point due to inflation. There used to be a time where you could do $500 PC.
Yeah, it's not
happening anymore.
No.
I would say like $700 to $800 is the bare minimum requirements now, just financial requirements for a gaming possible PC. And then when you're talking about you want a quality experience like you would match on a console, you're looking at over $1,000. Granted, still probably a worthwhile investment because of all the things you can do on a PC. So it's not just gaming, which is part of the argument for PCs in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about gaming on a PC, you're looking at dumping that. So unless you are, unless you have a job in the tech industry, you're probably not going to like a job that the only reason I bring that up is a job that subsidizes or once again justifies the cost of an expensive PC beyond gaming. Then you're not. I don't know. I don't think it's at least the barrier of entry is a lot higher. Even though if in the long term you still, again, one of the arguments for PC gaming is in the long term you often save on software, but that hardware is still so expensive to get. Again, we're kind of getting off track here, but the bottom line is, again, the only reason we bring that up in the first place and spent, the last 3 or 4 minutes talking about it is because people don't have access to everything. Very few people have access to all, quote, 4 of the major platforms.
Yeah, it's expensive.
It's expensive to do so. So the average person doesn't. And so then when a game comes out on a platform that you don't have, it can be frustrating. And that there's no bones about it. Like, I don't care, again, we can talk all about, the glories and benefits of exclusivity for developers and publishers and just for the games as a whole. But the bottom line is it sucks that I can't play Halo on my PlayStation. It does. I would love to be able to play Halo on my PlayStation. It sucks. I imagine for Xbox gamers, it sucks. Or PC only, right? That it sucks that they can't play God of War or whatever. I guess God of War, that's changing.
They're going to be.
Right, yeah. But, things aside, it sucks that they haven't been able to play God of War for the last, 4 years or 3 years or whatever. So, again, there is an argument to be made that console exclusivity hurts the consumer. I think there are mitigating factors, but at the end of the day, it hurts because the barrier of entry is so much higher than it is in any other form of entertainment. So,
and oddly enough, there is this whole idea of fandom banding around it being a Sony pony or an Xbox fanboy or girl.
Sure.
And you have this weird allegiance to a company, and so if Final Fantasy VII Remake is a timed exclusive, the Sony fans are on the internet ha ha, and the Xbox fans are that sucks, I want to play Final Fantasy VII on my Xbox, I don't want to have to buy a PlayStation right now, so I gotta wait, spoilers are going to happen, everyone's going to talk about it, I'm going to lose the conversation, and it's going to be old and no one's going to care about it when it finally comes to Xbox.
Sure.
But there's this whole toxic interaction that makes no sense whatsoever.
Oh, absolutely. Apparently Sony fans were so salty that God of War was coming to PC. And they were
other side of it. Thank you for bringing that up.
They were harassing PC players. They were harassing them for being excited for it and crapping on them you should have bought a PlayStation if you wanted to play this. It's why? Why is that necessary? Why are you mad that other people are having access to this 3 years later? You've been able... It doesn't make the game less fun for you. It doesn't make those memories less good for you. The only thing that I can understand why is, the only explanation for the behavior is you're having a hard time reconciling why you invested in this ecosystem in the first place, right? It's almost like a form of buyer's remorse. Is you're feeling buyer's remorse, so you feel like you need to crap on other people to make yourself feel better. It is definitely a byproduct of exclusivity that it's not really exclusivity's fault. It's not really the platform holder's fault for it, but it still happens. It's still a byproduct of it. It's still crappy.
And then you have the PC master race thing going on where it's they look down on console exclusives because consoles are a downgrade for them.
Sure.
It's not
you can't
4K 60 frames per second with ray tracing turned on, therefore it sucks and it's trash and it's garbage. So they dismiss
they dismiss it all.
Games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've spent $3,500 on my PC, therefore I can look down on you and your experience, right? Like, it's this idea. I mean, that's the truest form of graphic snobbery, right? It's this idea that it's like, oh, it doesn't run at 60 frames per second, or no, more like these days is like, it doesn't run at 120 frames per second at 4K resolution, ray tracing, and also I can mod it where I can turn the dragons in Skyrim into Thomas the Tank Engine, like, as if that's a better experience inherently than anything you have on your console, like as if your fun is somehow less and your experience is somehow less valid because you didn't run it at the experience that I prefer and that I've invested in. Once again, it's just another PC Master Race. It's just another form of buyer's remorse. It's another form of feeling guilty that you spent so much money on a console that you have to trash others in order to make yourself feel better and try to say that their experience is less valid so that you can feel better about yourself. It is not only the most toxic thing in the world, but it's so small and petty. And anybody who engages in that behavior, seriously... I had to stop myself from saying really mean things. Just
get out of
stop.
Here.
Just take a break. Take a break. Get out of here, right? Because we don't want you in our community. But also, take a break. Take a break. Stop and smell the roses. Go, try to find some enjoyment in your life. Because if gaming is making you so miserable that you have to go do that, then it's clearly not fulfilling you. And so take a break.
If I can explain to my 6-year-old, do not yuck someone else's yum, and he understands. Full-grown adults having a hard time understanding yucking someone else's yum.
Yeah.
People, someone else in the world gets to experience God of War. That's a happy thing to celebrate. That is awesome.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, bring it to Xbox. Bring it to everywhere.
Sure.
It doesn't matter. It's more people get to play games. Yep. And the last...
If you get the privilege of playing it first, appreciate that privilege. Don't poo-poo others when your privilege gets, quote, taken away by it being available to them. Everyone should celebrate how awesome the game is, and everyone should get a chance to if people get a chance to finally experience it, you should be happy for them as opposed to jealous of them. So anyways, we can move on, I think, because I'm glad you brought that up because it really is a con. It's a byproduct of this. It only has happened because of this exclusivity thing, and I don't necessarily think it's a reason why. I wouldn't necessarily say it's necessarily a failure of exclusivity, but it's a failure of the community to deal with exclusivity, I think, for sure. Yep. So, cool. All right. I think this is a short one-word answer. Who do you think benefits the most from console or from platform exclusivity?
Companies.
Publishers, right? Yeah, publishers. Not even necessarily...
Well, devs, too.
Well, developers, yeah. To some degree, I think. I think there are some...
Naughty Dog is raking in money because of their exclusive deal with Sony. Sony's pouring cash into Naughty Dog.
That's true.
When... what's the studio that made Fall Guys? They were bought by Epic Games.
Right.
And they just had truckloads of cash pulled up to that studio and just dumped money into... They are on Cloud 9. That's a development studio that is benefiting greatly from platform exclusivity. So publishers do, platform makers do,
there are
do.
There are probably some... I would say that for those examples, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I imagine there are probably examples of games that would have made more money had they been available to other platforms, right? So, there are games that that would objectively had made more money for both the publisher and the developer had they been available, had they not had an exclusivity arrangement or were owned by a specific platform and therefore only available on that platform. And I don't have any examples off the top of my head because part of that is a sort of what if extrapolative exercise because it didn't happen. So I can't point to data and say this game would have sold
example.
Better. Okay, sure.
Days Gone, made by Sony Bend.
Oh, yeah, probably would have...
If that game had come out on everything, it would have done great.
At the very least, if it had come out on PC and PlayStation, it would have done better, I think, for sure. Yeah.
And it did come out in a buggy state, and that's a different story, but they patched it up, made it really, really great, and then they did port it to PC, and it did end up becoming a success story. It did well. But when it first came out, exclusive to PlayStation 4, it was not a success story for Sony, for sure.
Yeah. So, and even in the form of publishers, I think it's important to note that, hardware does very, very rarely do the consoles themselves make the platform holders money, right? So Sony doesn't actually make a lot of money off of the hardware. It's ironic. It's one of those weird, Ouroboroses where it's the snake eating its own tail in regards to the fact that, PlayStation makes money when you buy PlayStation games. Right? So they make money off of their games. They make money off of the software. In fact, they make the most money when you buy a game from the PlayStation Store, the storefront itself.
Right, the digital sales.
Yep, exactly, the digital sales. So PlayStation wants you to buy a... PlayStation's willing actually to take a hit on you buying a PlayStation. They will lose money on you buying a PlayStation to get you on their platform in hopes that you're going to buy their games on that platform and they get a cut of all the games sold on their platform. So that's how they make their money, and that's how their business operates. And I think it's worth bringing up again that, like, again, they don't actually want to. They only want to sell consoles as a means to create an install base. That's why the PlayStation 4 was so successful, is because millions and millions and millions of people had a PlayStation 4, and that's why we have so many of these conversations about the quote install base on the PS5 is because it's smaller than the PS4's install base, and that's a problem for Sony, and they have to figure out how to make this transition and get people on the PS5 that were on PS4s. And if they start to lose people to the Xbox Series X, PS4 players to the Xbox Series X, that's a problem for Sony, and they have to figure that out, because they need that. They can only throw their weight around if they have that install base, and their business is predicated on that install base. So that'll be the big
Sony's
question.
Strategy has been first-party studios making amazing, absolutely incredible games you can only get on PlayStation.
Exactly. So back to the exclusive. That's why we brought it up, is because it's sort of a snake eating its own tail. It's like, we want you to buy our exclusive games on our platform, so we'll make exclusive games for our platform. I wonder, when does the strategy run out, right? Like, when does that...
Well, it's what's cool is this generation we're seeing the dichotomy here between Sony and Microsoft, because they had competed directly with each other pretty much through the Xbox 360 and PS3 era. Sony finally realized the value of its exclusive games, and you spun out stuff like Killzone 3, Resistance 2 and 3, Infamous 1 and 2, and suddenly people were flocking away from Xbox onto PlayStation, and the sales of PS3 actually outpaced 360 famously at the end of its life cycle. And then going into PS4, the strategies were different enough, Xbox flopped. But now Microsoft has changed their strategy, and now they're focused on consumers. And so instead of selling and pushing the Xbox Series X hardware, they came out with two Xboxes, a Series S and an X, and an S is cheaper. But there's also PC. Everything's on Game Pass. Yep. We want subscribers. So they're selling subscriptions to consumers, hardware
they're getting that monthly,
and they're just taking a loss on the hardware.
Sure.
It's like, we're going to get you onto the Microsoft software platform and get your subscription money, and we're going to focus hard on that. Where Sony is, we know,
we are, Microsoft knows. Again, Microsoft's big enough to also know you're going to have to, even on a PC, you're still going to have to buy our Windows operating system, right? Like, that's the way it's exclusive, because PC has multiple operating systems. You can't buy those,
Linux
you can play Halo on your Xbox, you can play Halo on your PC, but you can't play.
It's got to be Windows.
You can't play Halo on a Mac. You can't play Halo on a Linux. You still have to invest in some way in the Microsoft infrastructure, and that means purchasing a license, and whether you bought the license with your PC doesn't matter. It's still money goes into Microsoft's hands when you buy a Windows PC and play their games on it. So it's still, again, it all circles back around, and Microsoft has sort of properly identified that they are probably the only company that can leverage that, because they make computer operating systems as well. And then Azure is going to be a game changer too. Azure, their cloud infrastructure, is going to enable Microsoft Xbox X Cloud or whatever to be once again another platform that they'll be able to leverage for exclusivity. We are out of time, unfortunately. I'm going to have to ask for a single word answer then, and no explanations, or very little, like 2-sentence explanation. Do you think platform exclusivity is good or bad for the gaming world?
Yes.
I think I would agree, because at the end of the day, that innovation question will always come up in my mind. Are we getting the best artistic experiences? And right now, I think exclusivity is the primary driving force behind them. Does it suck for consumers still? Yeah. It's kind of a take the good with the bad, right? Like, I think I would rather have better gaming experiences, even if I don't get to experience them because they're locked behind a platform. I at least want to know that they're out there, right? And know that, like, I've chosen my platform because of the experiences, not because of arbitrary things like features and stuff. So.
And one thing that needs to change to make this a clear yes, that exclusivity is good. It's only good, if we can get full-blown crossplay for all third-party titles forever. Like, let's just like Call of Duty, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, whatever multiplayer co-op experience needs. Those third-party titles have zero reason to lock the player base into their respective ecosystems. We need to get that out of here. We need to have, like, full-blown, you got it on Xbox because that's all you could afford. I got it on PlayStation because that's all I could afford. We should still be able to play this game together outside of the console exclusives themselves. But
I agree.
That's another aspect of console exclusivity we didn't talk about too much here.
Yeah, we talked about it more in our crossplay episode. No, that's good. That's good that you bring it up.
It's gotten better. Like, crossplay is a thing. Battlefield is going to be,
well, and Sony just revealed themselves, or was revealed to be, were outed as the bad guys in that debate recently. And that's a whole conversation for a different time. But, Sony was basically revealed some internal documents which indicated that they are actively sabotaging crossplay efforts in order to continue to maintain their status quo.
They were throwing their 80 million player base around.
It made them look real bad. And again, like I said, that 80 million player base is great to throw around while they have it, but if they suddenly lose it, then they have no legs to stand on. So they start to lose their entire business model when that happens.
The existence of Ghost of Tsushima on PlayStation and Halo on Xbox is a wonderful thing for gaming. They are absolutely incredible experiences that only exist because consoles exclusivity exists. So that's the aspect of it that I say yes, that is good for.
Cool. We want to hear your final thoughts on it, and we are totally, again, it's sort of a tentative yes for both of us. We can definitely still see the downsides, and we want to talk about those with you if you are in strong disagreement with us, because I do think it's great to be open-minded and have those conversations so you can disagree with us and we can hear your point of view, you can hear our point of view, and we can have a healthy conversation about it as opposed to just flaming each other and saying that, we're failures in life because we chose to use our money to buy something that may brought us joy. So we want to have those conversations. If you want to flame us, you're still welcome to flame us and make us feel like try your best to make us feel like crap. I think you'll have a hard time because both of us are fairly confident.
You might get kicked from the Discord.
That's true. You are welcome to try, and Termite will share with you where you can try if you want to.
The easiest way to interact with us and have the most fun with our audience is through Discord, as I just mentioned. That link is open to anyone. It's a public invitation to anyone who wants to click on the link in our show notes. You can find our show notes at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bit-podsmash, where we have links to all of our podcast platforms of your choice and our other social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit. So go check out our social medias, hit us up on Discord, tag us or at us on Twitter, and let us know what you think about console exclusivity. One of the aspects we didn't touch base on is the Steam Epic Games debate, and we could talk about that on Discord.
We actually did talk about that in a separate episode, so
yes,
you can listen to that too.
Yep. So we've covered a lot of these things. You can do a search in the website for a specific topic. If you type Epic Games, you'll find that episode.
True.
So go do those things if you care enough to hear us rant or praise decisions that these big multi-million-dollar companies make.
Awesome, great. Next week, we are going to revisit our discussion about personality in video games, but we're going to approach it with a different personality type.
Yeah,
it's all about the rage right now is the Enneagram style. We may be past that trend. I don't know. I'm not the trendiest person in the world, but I kept hearing about Enneagram for like the last couple of years. So I said, why don't we apply Enneagram to our personality discussion? We talked about personality in video games before, but we primarily talked about it with the Myers-Briggs indicator type, which was all the rage a few years ago. So we're going to do Enneagram this time, and with the emphasis, and we'll discuss whether or not it's a valid means by which to discuss video game tastes. So anyways, you'll have that to look forward to on November 15th. We'll talk to you then.
See you next week.